Welcome to You're Always Wrong, where I'm always right.
And you're always wrong.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Robert.
And this week we're reading scary stories. The Haunted House. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they would always get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. Then just before midnight, he heard something start up the cellar. Walking back and forth, then sounded like somebody was trying to scream but got choked off. Then there was a lot of clashing around and struggling, and finally, everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw that. Does this sound too sexual? Am I using a weird voice?
No, you're good.
He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?"
Hollered.
He hollered. The door shut back easy-like, but there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, 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 up to the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?"
Ooh, ASMR.
The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. So faded. The preacher waited and waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over to shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man and thought that he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before the haunt started up again. Slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time, the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The light's blinking on this. Does that matter?
No.
Okay. The ghost came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off of her face.
Her hair was torn?
And tangled. And the flesh was dropping off of her face, so he could see only her bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was sort of a blue light way back in the back of her eye socket.
That's sweet.
And she had no nose on her face. She had 3 on her hands. I made up the hands part. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand and lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he would find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired and sunk down towards the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, It stuck to his hand. The man jumped and rubbed it and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he was screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to that house one night, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock, and he did. He found a big sack of money, and where that haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers were buried right into the cloth. It never did come out.
Wait, is that the end?
That's it. It's time to get spooky.
A widow lived alone on the top floor of an apartment house. One morning, her telephone rang. "Hello," she said. "This is the Viper," a man said. "I'm coming up." Somebody is fooling around, she thought, and hung up. A half hour later, the telephone rang again. It was the same man. "It's the Viper," he said. "I'll be up soon." The widow didn't know what to think, but she was getting frightened. Once more the telephone rang. Again it was the Viper. "I'm coming up now," he said. She quickly called the police. They said they would be right over. When the doorbell rang, she sighed with relief. "They are here," she thought. When she opened the door, there stood a little old man with a bucket and a cloth. "I am the Viper," he said. "I wish to wash and wipe the window."
In episode 2 of our podcast entitled Fears, I talked about being afraid to drive at night, especially by myself. And this is the story that fucked me up. High beams. The girl driving the old blue sedan was a senior at the high school. She lived on a farm about 8 miles away and used her car to drive back and forth. Who can relate? She had driven into town that night to see a football game, and she was on her way home. As she pulled away from the school, she noticed a red pickup truck following her from out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, the truck was still behind her. I guess we're just going the same direction, she thought. She began to watch the truck in her mirror. When she changed her speed, the driver of the truck changed his speed, and when she passed a car, so did he. Then he turned on his high beams, flooding the car with light. He left them on for almost a full minute. He probably just wants to pass me, she thought, but she was becoming uneasy. Usually she drove home over a back road. Not too many people went that way. But when she turned onto that road, so did the truck. I've got to get away from him, she thought, and she began to drive faster. Then he turned his high beams on again. After a minute, he turned them off. Then he turned them on again and off again. She drove even faster, but the truck driver stayed right behind her. He turned his high beams on again, and once more her car was ablaze with light. What is he doing, she wondered. What does he want? Then he turned them off again, but a minute later, he had them on again, but this time he left them on.
This should be a page of he turned them on, he turned them off, he turned them on.
At last, she pulled into her driveway, and the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped from the car and ran into her house. "Call the police!" she screamed at her father. Out in the driveway, she could see the driver of the truck. He had a gun in his hand. But when the police arrived, they started to arrest him, and he pointed at the girl's car. "You don't want me," he said. "You want him." Crouched behind the driver's seat, there was a man with a knife. As the driver of the truck explained it, the man had slipped into the girl's car before he left school. He saw it happen, but there was no way he could stop it. He thought about getting the police, but he was afraid to leave her, so he followed the car. Each time the man in the back seat reached up to overpower her, the driver of the truck turned on his high beams and the man dropped down, afraid that someone might see him. Those last 3 stories we got from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark collected from folklore and retold by Alvin Schwartz. There's some cool drawings in there too. Check them out. For this next one, we're going to be going onto the internet, deep diving for the scariest and most frightening tales told by man. I hope you're ready. I hate it when my brother Charlie has to go away, by horror in pure form. I hate it when my brother Charlie has to go away. My parents constantly try to explain to me how sick he is, that I'm lucky for having a brain where all of the chemicals flow properly to their destinations like undammed rivers. When I complain about how bored I am without a little brother to play with, they try to make me feel bad by pointing out that his boredom likely far surpasses mine. Considering his confined to a dark room in an institution, should that not say confinement?
Probably, yeah.
I always begged for them to give him one last chance. Of course, they did at first. Charlie has been back home several times, each time shorter in duration than the last. Every time without fail, it starts again. The neighborhood cats with gouged out eyes showing up in his toy chest. My dad's razors found dropped on the baby slides in the park across the street. My mom's vitamins replaced by bits of dishwasher tablets. My parents are hesitant now, using last chances sparingly. They say his disorder makes him charming, makes it easy for him to fake normalcy, and to try to trick the doctors, who care for him, into thinking he's ready for rehabilitation. That I will just have to put up with my boredom if it means staying safe from him. I hate it when Charlie has to go away. It makes me have to pretend to be good until he is back.
Ooh.
Damn, that's spooky. Guardians by Dark Alligator. He awoke to the huge insect-like creature looming over his bed, and he screamed his lungs out. They hastily left the room, and he stayed up all night, shaking and wondering if it had been a dream. The next morning, there was a tap on the door. Gathering his courage, he opened it to see one of them gently place a plate filled with fried breakfast on the floor, then retreat to a safe distance. Bewildered, he accepted the gift. The creatures chittered excitedly. This happened every day for weeks. At first, he was worried they were fattening him up, but after a particularly greasy breakfast left him clutching his chest from heartburn, they were replaced with fresh fruit. As well as cooking, they poured hot, steamy baths for him and even tucked him in when he went to bed.
Steamy.
Steamy. Get steamy with your insects. It was bizarre. One night, he awoke to gunshots and screaming. He raced downstairs to find a decapitated burglar being devoured by the insects. He was sickened, but disposed of the remains as best as he could. He knew they had just been protecting him. One morning, the creatures wouldn't let him leave his room. He lay down, confused but trusting, as they ushered him back into bed. Whatever their motives, they weren't going to hurt him. Hours later, a burning pain spread throughout his body. It felt like his stomach was filled with razor wire. The insects chattered as he spasmed and moaned. It was only when he felt a terrible squirming feeling beneath his skin that he realized the insects hadn't been protecting him. They had been protecting their young.
Fuck.
Robert's on the soundboard.
And I'm
and
fucking
is sucking it up.
This next story is called My Daughter Learned to Count by Real Science 87. My daughter woke me up around 11:50 last night. My wife and I had picked her up from her friend Sally's birthday party, brought her home, and put her to bed. My wife went into the bedroom to read while I fell asleep. Watching the Braves game. What? Daddy, she whispered, tugging my shirt sleeve. Guess how old I'm going to be next month? I don't know, beauty, I said as I slipped on my glasses. How old? She smiled and held up 4 fingers. It is 7:30 now. My wife and I have been up with her for almost 8 hours. She still refuses to tell us where she got them.
Next time, you'll know better. By I Post at Midnight.
Same.
Have you ever walked into a room and found a vampire? No, not the sexy kind, but a foul creature with bony limbs and ashen skin. The kind that snarls as you enter, like a beast about to pounce. The kind that roots you to the spot with its sunken, hypnotic eyes, rendering you unable to flee as you watch the hideous thing uncoil from the shadows. Have you seen me, Lindsay Jesperson, at 2 a.m.?
More of a goblin, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Has your heart started racing through your eye? Nope. Has your heart started racing through your legs? Whoa, my gosh. Has your heart started racing, though your legs refuse to? Have you felt time slow as the creature crosses the room and into the darkness of a blink?
Of a blink?
Have you felt time slow as the creature crosses the room in the darkness of a blink? I don't know. Have you shuddered with fear when it places one clawed hand atop your head and another under your chin so it can tilt you, exposing your neck? Have you squirmed as its rough, dry tongue slides down your cheek, over your jaw, through your throat? To your throat, in a slithering search that's seeking your artery? Have you felt its hot breath release in a hiss?
This is kind of sexual.
Against your skin when it probes your pulse? Shit. The flow that leads to your brain? Has its tongue rested there, throbbing slightly?
Oh, God.
As if savoring the moment? Have you then experienced a sinking, sucking blackness as you discover that not all vampires feed on blood? Some feed on memories. Well, have you? Maybe not. But let me rephrase that question. Have you ever walked into a room and suddenly forgotten why you walked in?
That was awful.
Slob on my knob, corn on the cob. Check in with me and do your job.
This next story is called He Stood Against My Window by Sabit Hook. I don't know why I looked up, but when I did, I saw him there. He stood against my window. His forehead rested against the glass, and his eyes were still and light, and he smiled a lipstick-red cartoonish grin. And he just stood there in the window. My wife was upstairs sleeping. My son was in his crib, and I couldn't move. I froze and watched him looking past me through the glass. Oh, please no. His smile never moved, but he put a hand up and slid it down the glass, watching me. With matted hair and yellowed skin and face through the window, I couldn't do anything. I just stayed there, frozen. Feet still in the bushes I was pruning, looking into my home. He stood against my window.
What They Don't Tell You About the Dead by Crimsai. Crimsai. Is that how you'd pronounce
Who
that?
cares?
Okay,
Just some
alright.
dumb guy's name.
That's not very nice. I don't want to sound mean, but the dead are pretty clueless. I've always seen them. When I was younger, everyone thought I was just talking to imaginary friends. After a couple of years, when I overheard my parents talk about calling a psychologist, I realized what I was talking to. See, Ghosts don't. Mm-mm. See, ghosts don't tend to realize they're dead, and they don't look like us in the. Nope, they don't look like in the movies. They just look like us. I'm pretty smart for a 13-year-old. So I started. Me, actually.
Same.
Me with my child
Actually,
voice.
same.
I'm pretty smart for a 13-year-old. So I started noticing certain patterns to tell them apart from the living. They could be a bit distant from living people, or you'd see them try to talk to people and they wouldn't even notice them. Some of them could tell I was different, that I noticed them. Like this guy I saw after school yesterday. I'm a big boy now, see? I don't need my parents to pick me up. Home is just a short walk away. He was standing away from the other parents, didn't talk to them, just stared at me. That's how I knew he was one of the ghosts. I went over,
Could
told
have been a
him.
pedophile.
I don't know. I went over, told him I knew what he was, and asked how I could help him. I don't remember much after that. I think because of what was happening this morning. Downstairs, my parents were crying. I tried talking to them, but they ignored me. They must have died last night somehow. Sometimes the new ghosts won't talk to me. Some police officers and reporters just arrived. They won't talk to me either. Just my parents. It's weird. I've never seen so many ghosts together before. Why won't anyone talk to me? 'Cause she's a ghost. It's totally like I see dead people. What's that movie called?
Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense.
Yeah, I bet that guy was like a pedo murderer guy.
She was a ghost the whole time.
Ah.
She was a ghost the whole time. That's why I said it's like Sixth Sense.
Could have fooled me. Wait, is that what happened in Sixth Sense?
Oh my god.
I've never seen it. It looks fucking terrible.
Sixth Sense has Bruce Willis in it. He's a child psychologist.
Haley Joel Osment. That little boy.
Yeah, the kid's like, I see dead people. And the psychologist, Bruce Willis, is like, no you don't. Plot twist, Bruce Willis is a ghost the whole time. He did see dead people. It was Bruce Willis.
This last story is called A Message from Your Personal Demons by Mr. Garm. Hello, my dear. You do not know who I am, but I know you. I am one of the 3 demons that you were assigned to you at birth. You see, some people in this world are destined for greatness, destined to live happy, full lives. You, I am afraid, are not one of those people. And it is our job to make sure of that. That's kind of fucked up. Who are we? Oh yes, of course, how rude of me. Allow me to introduce us. Shame is my younger brother, the demon on your left shoulder. Shame tells you that you're a freak, that those thought you are... The grammar is just fucked in some of these. That you will never fit in. Shame whispered into your ear when your mother found you playing with yourself as a child. Shame is the one who makes you hate yourself. Fear sits on your right shoulder. He is my older brother, as old as life itself. Fear fills every dark corner with monsters, turns every stranger on a dark street into a murderer. Fear stops you from telling your crush how you feel. He tells you it is better not to try than let people see you fail. Fear makes you build your own prison. Who am I then? I am the worst of your demons, but you see me as a friend. You turn to me when you have nothing else because I live in your heart. I am the one who forces you to endure, the one who prolongs your torment. Sincerely, Hope. Lindsay's just now pressing every fucking button on the soundboard possible. This is...
Happy holidays. And by holidays, I mean Halloween. Thank you for tuning in to You're Always Wrong. Be sure to find us on Instagram and on Twitter at YAW_podcast.
And don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for making it this far if you have.
See you next week, my spooky friends.